Our next speaker is Aviad, and Aviad, you want to try to share your screen?
Yes, so thank you, Eran, and a big thank you to Marina and Naveen for all the work you put into organizing this conference from far away. It goes very nicely up till now, and I hope it continues this way. Let me try to share the screen, so just a second.
And I think Heracles, who is your co-author, is also here.
Yes, so this is joint work. This is joint work with Enrico Minelli, who couldn't join, and also with Heracles Polemarchakis, who is here. And the title is Liberal Parentalism. So what are parents and what are children? Well, we're going to talk about parents and children, but of course we're aiming more broadly at social planners, governments on one hand, and constituencies on the other hand. So a child is somebody who makes decisions from one day to the next. And a parent is somebody who cares about the child and also has various technologies. So the parent can talk to the child and convey information. The parent also can coerce the child to do something in one period or in several periods. And the parent also has a commitment power. So the question is, of course, should parents intervene with what their children do or would do on their own? So of course they can try to convey information, but the perennial question is, should they actually intervene with deeds? Okay, so if we look at a child whose preferences do not change a long time, then we know this is not necessary. This is not needed, right? This is the principle of optimality in dynamic programming, right? So the child doesn't have a commitment power on what he will be doing tomorrow, but he can plan ahead, and comes tomorrow, he will be doing what actually yesterday he wanted himself to be doing when tomorrow indeed arrives, okay? So the main focus of this paper will be what happens if the child preferences do evolve over time. Okay, so let me give you an overview of what we'll be doing. So first we'll be looking at sophisticated children. What is a sophisticated child? A sophisticated child is a child whose preferences evolve a long time, but the child anticipates correctly this change. And for such children, we have a general result, which says generically, this means for almost every profile of utility functions that the child could have along the different periods, there exist Pareto improving parental interventions, okay, over what the child would be doing on his own. So that's for sophisticated children. But then we can ask, what about naive children or partially naive children, right? Children who are maybe uncertain or even wrong about their future preferences. So even to ask the question properly, we need an appropriate setting, an appropriate framework. So we'll be presenting a type space setting that is needed to formalize the question. And in this setting, we'll also be able to talk about nudges, informational nudges by the parent, right? The parent could tell the child, look, you know, I realize that this is what you believe about your preferences in the future, but notice that, you know, maybe that's not precisely the case. So this would amount to, so if the child gets convinced or influenced by the nudge, then this would mean a change of type or a change of belief by the child. And for such children, we have the result that there are cases where there might exist no Pareto improving parental interventions. Okay, so it might be the case that once the parent intervenes in any possible way, either by coercion or just by words, at least the child in at least one of the periods will get upset. And even nudges might be painfully sobering to that effect. So we'll be looking at the example. And for such cases, then we ask, okay, so what should parents do? And here our proposal would be a kind of a normative second best, and would be to say maybe the parent may like to look at interventions that minimize the maximal disappointment across the time period. Okay, and take this as a normative constraint. Okay, so let's start with a simple example. Okay, the child comes back from school and he has the chore to read 3 chapters in 3 days. And reading the chapters is tiring. So reading xi on day I takes xi square hours. And the child has, first of all, the child has a present bias, sorry. So the child cares more about today than about tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And also the child has vivid memories. So the child also, if the child suffered in the past, then this enters or upsets the happiness of the child. Okay, so let's have a concrete look. So in the first day, the disutility of the child gives weight 1 to the reading time on day 1, and half to the reading time on day 2, and the remaining reading time on day 3. On day 2, the disutility is again, the day 3 gets weight of half relative to today, and the memory of the past experience is again very vivid, so it comes with weight 1, and the disutility on day 3 is just so first of all, notice that on day 3 there are no revealed preferences. Right, so the child must complete the chore, must complete the task. Okay, but still he may be more happy or less happy, and this depends on how much he reads that day, and also how long it took him to read on that day, and how long it took him to read on the previous day. Okay, so how does the child solve the problem? If the child is sophisticated, then already from maybe the very first paper that dealt with this, which is Strotz in 55, but then there are subsequent works like Pollack and others. There's a finite horizon here. So if the child is sophisticated and anticipates correctly his future utilities, then he just solves by backward induction, right? So on day 1, the child says, okay, suppose I read x1 on day 1, okay, what will I choose on day 2? So on day 2, x1 will be given already. So I will only be able to choose how much to read on day 2 and what to leave to day 3. Tomorrow, I understand that I'll be minimizing this function, okay, again with weight half to the last day. So this immediately gives the reaction function how much on day 2 the child will read as a function of how much he read on day 1. And then on day 1, of course, the child chooses, okay, understanding that whatever he leaves, tomorrow he will read 1/3 of what's left and leave to the last day 2/3 of what's left. Okay, so of course you can solve this. You get several numbers. So you see, because of this present bias, the child reads pretty little on the first day, a bit more on the second day, and twice than that on the last day. And it also gives rise to some utility levels that we denote with heads. Okay, so the child suffers least on day 1, a bit more on day 2, and quite a bit on day 3. Now, what about the parent? Okay, so what does...
So Aviad, just a clarification.
Sure.
So those hat utilities, are those sort of anticipatory? Are you interpreting these as anticipatory utilities?
No, these are experienced. No, these are actually experienced happiness levels. Okay, if the child is left to his own to choose.
So,
right?
so
Because
that's coming just from the flow, the sort of flow, the flow payoff. So I guess I'm a little.
No, so here is again the utility functions. Okay, so this is the utility experienced on day 1. This is the utility experienced on day 2. So but here utility, really read this as happiness level. Okay, so I see that you're.
I'm still puzzled because so the happiness level on day 1 depends upon what he's doing on day 2.
Yes. Because okay, I understand now. I understand the question. This is not the happiness level. Okay, at day 1. Yes. So it's not just a felicity function which depends just on the flow. Okay, it depends on, in let's say take day 2. Okay, so my happiness level depends on the flow of felicity, if you like, on day 2. It depends on my memory, if I had a nice time, nice time yesterday or less of a nice time, and it also depends on what I anticipate, right? So I don't know, if I plan a vacation to travel abroad, and which I cannot do now, but I already feel happy with the thought that I'll be traveling. Okay, so this sums this all. Actually, you could think of this even so we take this, so this is an excellent question. We take these utilities as a primitive here, okay? But of course you could ask, how are these derived from flows of felicity in different days? Or you could even think of flows of foregone felicity, okay? So I could say even, I took this, I turned right, but here's the road not taken. And what maybe I regret that I didn't follow another path, and this makes me upset. Okay, so in this, so yes, here we just take these utilities from sequences of actions as we take them as primitives, U1, U2, U3. Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so this gives rise indeed to these are the benchmark utility levels. That's what the child will be doing on his own. And then the parent, a well-intentioned parent, can ask, okay, should I intervene? So a parent presumably wants to minimize some average disutility, okay? So one first thing to notice is that probably the parent would want to take the child on the different days, the happiness levels seriously, and indeed minimize the average or some average of these utilities, and not the total reading time, right? It's only the child in the last day who actually looks back and on the total reading time. But that's the perspective of the child in one particular period. In previous periods, the child, you remember, the child had different interests. Only here the child cares about total reading time. So if the parent averages these 3, then he gets something else. So the parent may want to say, okay, if I want to, if I'm well-intentioned toward the child, what I should be doing, then I should coerce or induce x1 and x2 that minimize this utility, okay? And if you solve this, I didn't write down the numbers, then you get, I mean, as you could expect, that the parent imposes on the child to work more on day 1 and also on day 2, so that not so much is left for the last day. But then if you look at the disutilities, then you realize that indeed on day 1, with the parent's intervention, the disutility is smaller, and also on day 3, the disutility is smaller. But on day 2, the disutility is higher, okay? So the average is, of course, smaller. That's what the parent is minimizing. But there's one particular period in which the child would be upset with this intervention, okay? So this is not a Pareto improvement. So you may like to think that maybe a liberal parent, okay, who takes seriously the child in all periods, in each and every period, okay, would be willing to induce only Pareto improving interventions, okay? You know, vis-a-vis the laissez-faire backward induction path that a child will be following on his own. And that's, you know, something that's been already suggested in the literature already by Leibson, and then by Matt Jackson and Liat Yariv, and also there are recent papers by Kang and Ye. Okay, so this means that now the parent would want to maximize the average utility, but subject to the constraint that the utility in each period is at least as large as what the child would experience, you know, would get on his own. And then indeed, if you solve that, then you get new numbers. Okay, again, the parent makes the child work harder on day 1 and day 2, but not as much as before. And as a result, what happens on day 2? Well, on day 2, the child is upset that he has to work more on day 2. He's also upset, you know, having less time to play with friends yesterday, okay, because he has vivid memories. But nevertheless, he is happy that tomorrow he assigns weight half, but nevertheless, okay, he's happy that less will be left for him to read tomorrow. So this is the place where the constraint is binding. Okay, so what's the general theorem? Okay, the general theorem says, okay, if for generic sophisticated children, right? So for almost every profile of utility functions, okay, for days 1, 2 to n, okay? If you look at a backward induction path which is interior, then every such interior backward induction path admits a Pareto improvement. Okay, so technically, I didn't write it down this way, but technically it means that there's an open dense set in the space of profiles of utility functions that are smooth enough, and so on and so forth, that have this property. And how do you prove such a theorem? Then you write down the system of first order conditions for backward induction, and also the condition that express Pareto optimality. And first of all, you check, and that's the technically hard work. You check that this system is transversal to 0, and then you notice, and this is easy, that this system has more equations than variables. Then this means that generically backward induction is not compatible with Pareto optimality. Okay, so that's about sophisticated children. So for sophisticated children, liberal parents, you know, have an easy time. Okay, they can find ways to help these kids without, while tolerating or honoring their default laissez-faire backward deduction happiness levels that the child would experience if the parent hadn't intervened. Okay, but what happens now if the child is naive or partially naive? Okay, so the child may misperceive his future utilities or have wrong beliefs about them. Okay, so first we need some framework to talk about this. We do want to assume that still that the child has a good memory. So the child remembers past experience. So what he did, the child remembers also what he felt. Okay, so this we want to assume, but the child might misperceive his future preferences. So how would we model that? So we need a space of states of the world where a state is a profile of types, one for each period. And in period I, type I is associated with what? First of all, a belief about the future self's types. Okay, that's one thing. Then we need the utility function on choice sequences. And since this might not necessarily pin down a unique best reply, we also like to specify what is this best reply for this particular type, okay, which is compatible with the utility function and the belief about the future. Okay, so how do we calculate these best replies? Okay, so my best reply on day 2, of course, depends on what I believe my best reply will be on day 3, okay? So I have to work this backwards, okay? So I have to start with all the types of the last period. They remember everything, and they don't really have beliefs. So they only have a utility function. So we just have to specify one action that is a best reply to what they experienced in the past. And once we know, once we specified the best reply of all the types in the last period, then we go to the next to last and so forth, okay? And so on by backward induction. And now we need to define what is the backward induction path in this state of the world, okay? So this we do by induction, right? So we know now the best reply function for each type. So in particular, we know the best reply function of type tau1 in the first period. There is no history, so this is just what this type is doing. Then this type, once he has no uncertainty about the past and he saw this action, now he's best replying to what tau1 did, okay, and so on and so forth. And then we can also calculate the U hats here, okay, and now this will be, expectations with respect to the beliefs. So these are the beliefs about the future. We know for each possible future, so tau1 to tau up to I minus 1 and up to tau I, actually the type tau I knows, okay? So on this, he doesn't have any uncertainty. On the future, he has some uncertainty. So he might not be sure what will happen next, okay? For each possible path that could take place, he has a utility level and he has a belief about these possible futures. And this is his expected level of happiness, okay? So this becomes...
Aviad?
Yes.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yes.
I think I got confused. I expected you to define the backward induction path from type N, from agent N to agent 1, and somehow it seems that you...
No, I did. What we do when we do backward induction when we go from the end to the beginning, what we actually do, we define best replies, if you think about it, right? So for each, I'm the last one to play, okay? But there could be, I'm the last one to play after you did this or after you did that, okay? For each history that I observe, I best reply. So this is the folding back, okay? But with a particular type, then, okay, this is the path, and this is the utility level. Yes. So we did solve from the backwards.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so now look at now let's look at an example. Okay, so it'll be the same example as before, but now let's think that the child naively believes that only today he has a present bias. Okay, so tomorrow he believes that tomorrow the present bias will disappear, right? So suppose the child comes back from school and his mother asks, did you get any homework? And the child says, yes, I got these 30 exercises that I should solve in 3 days. So the mother asks, okay, so what do you plan to do? And the child says, today I really want to go down to play with friends. So today I'll solve 6, and tomorrow 12, and the day after tomorrow 12. Okay. So this is what the child could have in mind, and notice that what the child gives the same weight to tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and the child wrongly believes that also tomorrow he will give the same weight to tomorrow, which will become tomorrow's today. Okay, so tomorrow it will become today. So again, also tomorrow we will give the same weight to days 2 and 3. Okay, so this means that the child wrongly believes that his preferences do not change. Okay, so he anticipates that he will carry half of the remaining chore on days 2 and 3, which is he expects this to do tomorrow, and this is also what he would like to do today. So this means that any parental intervention that will impose anything else, okay, cannot be Pareto improving, okay? By the principle of optimality, the child believes that what he will be doing, okay, is optimal from his perspective. So any change relative to that, will disappoint the child on day 1. Now, how about a nudge? Okay, so suppose the mother is very liberal and she says, I'm not going to stop you from going down to play with your friends, but maybe the mother thinks that she can say something to the child. So maybe she says, are you really sure that tomorrow you wouldn't also like very much to go down to play with friends? So, and if that's the case, what would this mean on how much work will be left to day 3? Okay. So suppose that's what the parent does, or she just says these words. Okay, she doesn't intervene. She doesn't stop the child from going down to play. And after saying this, she lets the child do whatever he likes. Okay. So if as a result of this, now the child suddenly assigns even a small probability to his actual type, okay? The child also tomorrow will have this present bias. Then with this new type, tau1 dot epsilon, okay, he will change his behavior. Maybe he will solve today 7 exercises instead of 6, but he will be upset, okay? Because first of all, he will be working more today, and he will have a more gloomy prospect about what's going to happen. So even a nudge cannot make the child happier. An informational nudge cannot make the child happier in all 3 days. Okay, so I said in words everything that's written here. So Okay, so I will skip. So then the question is, okay, the parent is facing this situation. There exists no Pareto improving interventions. Okay, so what should the parent do? Okay, so one option is to say nothing. Okay, if I cannot do anything without upsetting my child in at least one period, then I prefer not to do anything. Okay, but given that the parent has the technology to intervene, okay, we can notice that non-intervention is just one item on the menu of actions that the parent can take, okay? So it would be hard to claim, okay, that non-intervention would be normatively neutral, okay? Or the parent could go the other direction. The parent could say, okay, if I cannot make sure that I do not upset my child in some period, then, okay, I'm going my way. My way is the average utility of my child, or some average, okay? And that's what I'm going to make sure that is maximized, and I'm going to impose that, okay? But then notice that the result of this might be that the child in some particular period get immensely hurt, okay? Because we're looking at just at the average. So what we are proposing as a possible criterion here, okay, which may be called minimally illiberal parental interventions, okay? So just recall that, okay, what is the Pareto improvement constraint? Okay, it says that the path that the parent will impose will be at least as large than the default utility level in each and every period. Okay, now if this cannot be done, then how can we minimally relax this constraint? Okay, put here minus delta for the minimal delta for which such feasible intervention exists. Okay, and you can find, if you like to look at the paper, you can find an example of how the parent would do it in the example I have just described. And what I would just like to note for a conclusion is that such minimally disappointing intervention might be actually more benign than a nudge, okay? So we typically think of nudges as something, we typically think of a nudge as something which is benign because, this is just words, there's no coercion, okay? But we realize that the nudge, could change my beliefs and therefore could change my mood. And if I'm following as a parent this minimal disappointment constraint, instead I can make sure to smooth as much as possible this sobering pain of disillusionment across the different time periods. Okay, so this is our proposal, and as I promised to Iran, I think I left around 10 minutes or so for questions, if there are any.
Okay, so thank you, Aviad. We have plenty of time, so if anybody has a question. So let me make half a comment. If I understand correctly, the idea of this parental intervention, you can think about it also more generally in a game in which there are n players, and each of them can, and you can look at the Nash equilibrium of the game, and then you can say a liberal designer is somebody who restricts their action in a way that would be Pareto dominating the Nash equilibrium outcome.
So any player or just the planner?
So the planner could have restricted the actions in the players in a way that will make the outcome Pareto optimal for the Nash equilibrium outcome. Right? I mean, I think
Pareto
that
improving.
Pareto improving, yeah. So, and in your specific case where the players are agents of selves of the same person, you call it parentalism, right? But
yes,
but
right.
you could think about you can do the same exercise more generally, right? And ask
yes
the same thing,
thanks.
essentially.
Yes.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, I guess
I have a question.
Yes.
Aviad, yeah. So I guess could you say more about sort of why you're opting for this sort of minimally I forgot what you called it, but minimal disappointment.
Yes.
Aversion, as opposed to other ways of dealing with the fact that you can't get Pareto improvements?
So, I mean, of course, that there could be. I mean, of course, there could be others. That's one of them. We're just, we thought of, focusing on one possible normative guiding line, okay? But you're absolutely right. There could be others, right? Maybe you would want to put other constraints or maximize something else. Yes, the main thing was to point out that this issue that under wrong beliefs or uncertainty, there might be no Pareto improving intervention. So something else has to be proposed. Okay, and also its distributional properties have to be taken into account, right? Whether how much you hurt the different selves if you do. And we thought that this is a kind of a natural extension, because instead of 0 here, you write something negative, which is the smallest in absolute value that is feasible.
If I may suggest something, I could also think of this in a political economy context, that these are citizens and there are politicians. And in this case, there is one politician. You could also think about political competition, right? That one parent suggests one scheme and the other one another one, or there are political parties and they are concerned with these things also, right? Because if they have stringent measures, you have to, not a lot of public spending now, and so on, if then voters are naive, as they might be, and so on. So have you thought about that? That some structure like this, some temporal structure, and maybe there is competition here. I mean, two competing people, and commitment and non-commitment. Lots of, it opens the door, I think, for a lot of very important things for political economy.
Yes, that's very interesting, and I think this complements nicely the suggestion by Eran. Okay, so Eran suggested several players, and you suggest several planners or politicians who are competing. Yes. Yes, so this opens the door for many things. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.